To understand the argument between Patton and Eisenhower, you need to understand who these two men were to each other. They were not just colleagues. They were not just fellow officers. They were old friends. Two men who had known each other for over 20 years, who had served together, argued together, and built their careers side by side. Dwight Eisenhower was everything Patton was not. Quiet, where Patton was loud. Diplomatic, where Patton was brutal. Patient, where Patton was furious. Eisenhower was the supreme political operator of the American military, a man who could manage difficult personalities, satisfy demanding politicians, and keep the alliance between America and Britain from falling apart. Patton was everything Eisenhower secretly admired: aggressive, decisive, a pure warrior who cared nothing for politics or public relations. Where Eisenhower managed the war, Patton fought it. Eisenhower once said of Patton, "He is the finest leader in the Army for moving fast and hitting hard. There is no one better. But he is impossible to control." And Patton once said of Eisenhower, "Ike is a good soldier, but he has never commanded men in battle. He does not understand what is possible when you have momentum." These two men, old friends, complete opposites, were about to have the most consequential argument of the entire war. After the D-Day landings in June 1944, the Allied advance in France had been painfully slow. The German army had contained the enormous Allied force in a narrow strip of Normandy for nearly 2 months. The hedgerow country of northern France was a defender's paradise. Thick earthen walls surrounding every field, perfect for ambushes and machine gun positions. Then came Operation Cobra in late July. A massive aerial bombardment blew a hole in the German lines, and through that hole poured George Patton and his newly activated Third Army. What followed was the most spectacular armored advance in American history. Patton's tanks moved at speeds that stunned everyone, friend and enemy alike. They swept west into Brittany, then pivoted east toward Paris. They bypassed strong points and encircled entire German divisions. They moved so fast that German commanders couldn't figure out where Patton was going until he had already been there and left. In 3 weeks, the Third Army covered more ground than the Allied armies had covered in the previous 2 months combined. The Germans were in full retreat, not an organized withdrawal, but a desperate rout. Entire divisions were surrendering. Generals were abandoning their headquarters. The road to Germany was open. Patton could feel it. He could smell it. He was closer to ending the war than any Allied commander had been since 1939. He just needed fuel. Here's the brutal reality of armored warfare that most people don't understand. A Sherman tank gets about 1 mile per gallon of gasoline. In a full advance, Patton's army of hundreds of tanks, trucks, half-tracks, jeeps, and artillery pieces consumed millions of gallons of fuel every single day. All of that fuel had to be transported from the beaches of Normandy, still the only major supply point for the Allied armies, across hundreds of miles of French roads to the front lines. As Patton's army moved faster and faster, the supply lines grew longer and longer. The trucks carrying fuel were driving further every day just to keep up. By mid-August 1944, Patton's Third Army was running dry. His tanks were stopping, not because of German resistance, but because they had no fuel. Patton was watching the greatest opportunity of the war slipping away, not because of the enemy, but because of logistics. He was furious. He called his supply officers daily, demanding more fuel. He threatened, cajoled, begged. His men resorted to draining fuel from captured German vehicles, siphoning gasoline from abandoned trucks, scrounging every drop they could find. It wasn't enough. And then Patton found out why. The fuel that should have been going to his army was being redirected. Eisenhower had made a decision, and it was a decision that Patton believed was the greatest strategic blunder of the entire war. The decision came down to strategy, and it came down to the eternal rivalry between two very different visions of how to win the war. On one side was British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. Montgomery believed in what he called the single, full-blooded thrust. Concentrate all resources into one massive attack on a narrow front, punch through the German lines, and drive straight to Berlin. And that thrust, in Montgomery's vision, would naturally be led by Montgomery himself. On the other side was Patton. He believed in maintaining momentum across a broad front, keep all armies moving, keep the Germans off balance. Don't give them time to form new defensive lines. Speed was everything. Stop moving, and the Germans would recover. Eisenhower, as supreme commander, had to choose, and he chose Montgomery. The decision was not purely military. It was political. Montgomery was British. The British had been fighting the war longer than the Americans. Churchill was demanding that British forces play a leading role. Eisenhower, who was as much a diplomat as a general, understood that the alliance had to be maintained. He redirected fuel and supplies from Patton's Third Army to support Montgomery's planned operation in the Netherlands, Operation Market Garden. Patton's army was ordered to halt and wait. When Patton found out, he called Eisenhower. The exact words of the conversation between Patton and Eisenhower have been recorded in various accounts. Patton's diary, the memoirs of staff officers who were present, and later historical research. The details vary slightly, but the core of what was said is consistent. Patton was almost vibrating with suppressed fury when he picked up the phone. "Ike," he said, "give me 400,000 gallons of gasoline and I will end this war in 2 weeks." Eisenhower listened. Patton continued. His argument was simple and devastating. His army was moving. The Germans in front of him were broken, disorganized, retreating in chaos. There was nothing between him and the Rhine River, the last major natural barrier before Germany itself. If he could cross the Rhine now in August, before the Germans had time to regroup, he could be in Germany before autumn. He could end the war before Christmas. But he needed fuel. And the fuel was going to Montgomery. Eisenhower's response was patient, careful, and diplomatic. He acknowledged Patton's argument. He agreed that the opportunity was real. But he explained the political reality. Montgomery had to be supported. The British alliance had to be maintained. Resources had to be shared. Patton's patience ran out. "Monty is not going to end this war," Patton said, his voice rising. "He has never moved fast in his life, and he never will. Every day we sit here, the Germans are building new defensive lines. Every day we wait, more men will have to die to break through those lines. Give me the fuel, and it ends now." Eisenhower said no. The phone call ended. Patton threw the receiver down hard enough to damage it. He turned to his chief of staff and said, "This war will last another year, and thousands of men will die who didn't have to." What happened next proved Patton right in the most devastating possible way. Montgomery's grand plan, Operation Market Garden, launched in September 1944. It was the largest airborne operation in history. Thousands of paratroopers dropped into the Netherlands to seize a series of bridges. The final bridge at Arnhem was the prize, cross it, and the Allied armies would be across the Rhine and into Germany. It was a catastrophe. The Germans, who had been given time to recover precisely because Patton had been stopped, were ready. British paratroopers at Arnhem were surrounded and destroyed. Of the 10,000 men who dropped on Arnhem, fewer than 2,000 escaped. The bridge was not taken. The Rhine was not crossed. The Allied advance ground to a halt. The Germans used the time to build the Siegfried Line, a massive network of fortifications along the German border. What had been an open road in August 1944 was now a heavily defended wall. The war that Patton had said could be over by Christmas 1944 lasted until May 1945. 8 more months, hundreds of thousands more casualties. The Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last massive counterattack, which nearly split the Allied armies in two, the brutal winter fighting in the Hürtgen forest, the bloody crossing of the Rhine that could have been done in August for almost nothing. All of it, Patton believed, was the consequence of one decision. One phone call. One answer that should have been yes. History has been complicated in its judgment of Eisenhower's decision. Some historians agree with Patton. They argue that the broad front strategy was too cautious, that the opportunity in August 1944 was real, and that Eisenhower's political considerations cost the Allies dearly in blood and time. Others defend Eisenhower. They point out that Patton's supply lines were already dangerously stretched. 400,000 gallons of gasoline might have gotten him to the Rhine. But could he have crossed it? Could he have fought his way through Germany on a single narrow thrust, with exposed flanks on both sides? The Germans were defeated but not dead. They could have counterattacked Patton's overextended army and cut it off entirely. Eisenhower himself, in his memoirs, defended the broad front strategy as the only responsible choice given the political and logistical realities he faced. But Patton never changed his mind. Until the day he died, he believed that August 1944 was the moment the war could have been ended, and that the decision to stop his army was the greatest mistake of the entire European campaign. George Patton was not a modest man. He was not a man who doubted himself or second-guessed his instincts, but on this one question, could he have ended the war in 2 weeks with 400,000 gallons of gasoline? History has never fully answered. What we know is this. In August 1944, Patton's Third Army was moving faster than any army in the war. The Germans in front of him were broken. The road to the Rhine was open. And Eisenhower said stop. What we know is that Operation Market Garden failed completely, that the Germans recovered, that the war lasted 8 more months. What we know is that when Patton told Eisenhower the war would last another year, he was almost exactly right. 2 old friends, 1 phone call, 1 decision. And Patton believed, until the day he died in December 1945, that he had been right. Maybe he was. We will never know. But the question haunts military historians to this day. What if Eisenhower had said yes?